The central arguments for God's existence in natural theology is the argument from consciousness, and in my opinion is one of the most important arguments centered in natural theology. Now, as a side, you may note that I've already done a video on the argument from consciousness, but since that earlier video's debut, I've understood the argument a lot better and think that I can clarify and defend the argument quite a lot better than I did before. Now, to make sure that my argument will be clear, allow me to define what I mean by brain and mind. By brain, I mean the physical and spatially located structure that exists in the human skull. Mind, however, is harder to define. Some have defined a mental entity as something such that it would not exist if there were no sentient creatures. Others define a mental entity as something about which the subject is in a better position to know than anyone else, or something to which a subject has private first-person access. For our purposes, I'm going to define mind as entities or events which belong to the private world of inner experience. Allow me to briefly provide several examples of an entity or event in the mind. Consider your thoughts, for example. Whether you are daydreaming, thinking about your spouse, or realizing that you forgot to pick up the kids from the pool, your thoughts are mental events and are very different from physical events. Physical events have weight, are located in space, have electrical features, etc. However, mental events do not. When you are thinking about picking up the kids from the pool, for instance, this event is immediate, direct, and not mediated by anything else and private. I have no idea what you are thinking, nor can a doctor know the content of your thoughts without asking you. Second, consider the beliefs that you have. Wilder Penfield demonstrated that there is no place within the brain that beliefs or decision-making skills are stored. No matter how much Penfield probed the cerebral cortex, there was no location where electrical stimulation caused the patient to believe something or decide. Again, your beliefs that you have about politics, religion, and that annoying friend that you have do not have weight, nor do they have spatial location, as Penfield and later Sperry discovered. Your beliefs are private to you, and unless I ask, there's no way I or a neurosurgeon can ascertain what you believe. Third, consider the propositional attitude that we have. Example, I hate the sound of a C major chord, and acts of will. Propositional attitudes contain the state of affairs that the attitude is directed. For example, G sharp is a musical chord, I am a person. The attitude itself, dislike, hate, and the propositional content and meaning embedded in the attitude. Nowhere are attitudes located. Lastly, consider acts of will or purposing. By acts of will, I mean situations where intentional acts, of volition are acted on. For example, suppose a student underlines a key portion of text. The act of will is the initial thought of bringing about the underlining. These would all be examples of mental events and entities. Now, in general, there are three major views of mental entities, those being Physicalism, Epiphenominalism or property dualism, and Substance Dualism. By Physicalism, I mean the view that everything that exists is material or reducible to matter. Thus, on this view, what is meant by mind events, or mental, is exclusively explained by the human nervous system, brain, and neural synapses. Conversely, a second view, property dualism, is also referred to as Epiphenominalism. On this view, the mind can be viewed either as a property of the body or as a byproduct of the brain. So according to Epiphenominalism, human consciousness exists but is supervenient over the brain. Moreover, consciousness evolved from matter, i.e. the mind is emergent and is an effect but not a cause of brain activity. The last view, in the view that I will be defending, Substance Dualism, which is the view that the mind is a real non-physical substance distinct from the body that has causal power. Thus, on this last view, the mind is a non-physical entity that exists and was crafted by God. Now, having introduced three competing views of human consciousness, I am now in a good position to develop the argument from consciousness, or AC. I shall suggest one argument very briefly and then argue for another at much greater length. The initial and main argument will be an inductive argument, specifically in the form of an inference to the best possible explanation. By deconstructing rival views of mental events, defending substance dualism, and applying several criteria of theory acceptance, I will conclude that the mind is in fact a non-material substance distinct from the brain and most at home, quote-unquote, in theism. Specifically, my argument can be formulated like this. Given the three criteria of theory acceptance, which is basicality, naturalness, and epistemic value, and the nature of the rival hypotheses, human consciousness is best explained by substance dualism. Now, my brief second argument will be a deductive argument authored by J.P. Moreland, which deduces that God is the author of the mind. Now, before I outline the series, allow me to briefly unpack what I mean by criteria of acceptance. A crucial factor in the acceptance of a theory is whether or not a specific theory has a rival. Specifically, I listed 3 criteria, those being basicality, naturalness, and epistemic value. The criteria of basicality details whether a theory needs to provide an explanation or a basic description of some phenomena. In the presence of rival theories, an explanation is in order, whereas in the absence of a rival theory, a description can be appropriate. Thus, in light of the 3 rival theories on human consciousness, each theory needs to provide an explanation of human consciousness. Second, the criteria of naturalness can be formally defined as follows, and this is a mouthful, so get ready. Some entity E is natural for a theory T, just in case either E is a central core entity of E, or E bears a relevant similarity to central core entities in E's category within T, the theory. Moreover, given rival theories R and S, the postulation of E and R is ad hoc. Ad hoc meaning an inappropriate adjustment of a theory whose sole justification is to save that theory from falsification. So the postulation of E is ad hoc and question begging against advocates of S if E bears a relevant similarity to the appropriate entities in S, and in this sense is at home in S but fails to bear this similarity to the appropriate entities in R. Get y'all that? Thus, in light of the 3 rival hypotheses, if human consciousness is more natural to Epiphenominalism, let's say, than Physicalism, then it would be ad hoc and question-begging to ascribe human consciousness to Physicalism. The last criteria is epistemic value. By epistemic value, I mean normative properties of theories, for example, fruitful for new research, accurate, predictive, etc. And these properties confer some degree of justification on some theory. It is quite possible for 2 rival theories to rank with relative merits, or for each to have strong merits in different ways. Thus, given rival theories A, Physicalism, and B, Substance Dualism, if A is simpler than B, but B is more descriptively accurate than A, then it may be inappropriate and indeed question-begging for advocates of A to cite A's simplicity as grounds for judging it superior to B. Thus, in relation to human consciousness, one can only measure the epistemic impact of a theory by taking issue by issue. With my argument in place and the criteria defined, I will now organize this series in the following way. First, I will lay out an introduction and establish the argument, the section you are currently watching. Second, I will lay out several arguments against the notion that consciousness is exclusively explained by neurology, i.e. physicalism, and conclude that such a view is false. Third, I will construct several arguments against the notion that the mind evolved from matter and is emergent or supervenient in Epiphenominalism, and conclude that this view also is false. Fourth, I will construct an opposing view that human consciousness is a substance distinct from the physical brain and defend it from several common objections. And finally, and fifthly, and lastly, I will relate an additional argument via J.P. Moreland's deductive formulation of the argument from consciousness, and conclude that it is logically valid and correctly ascribes mental events to God.